Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for the message for the 16th of January. And I hope you're doing okay. God bless you for being part of this by sharing in this message. Our reading is from Zechariah chapter 4, and it's the fifth in a sequence of visions in what is the last but one book of the Old Testament. And it's a rather curious and strange book. So let me just reassure you, it is curious and it's odd reading at first, but actually it is not particularly difficult to interpret. Need to know a few things to help us do that. So imagine this land then that has been effectively devastated for as long as Queen Elizabeth has been on the throne for the UK. Um, and, and that's a lot of years, 70 years. 70 years ago, in the history of this particular country, Israel, or the remnant of Israel called Judah, um, a superpower had marched in, destroyed the main buildings, and forced into migration to other countries the greater part of the population, leaving behind uh, the poor of the land, people to work the land and thereby help feed the life of the conquering empire. 70 years have passed in this desperate condition, but then a new superpower has taken over and declared that Israel can rebuild itself. So that process has begun. And central to the rebuilding of the whole of the land is the rebuilding of the capital city, Jerusalem, and central to rebuilding every aspect of national life, absolutely everything, is the temple in Jerusalem. The new superpower has appointed a governor to oversee the work, and the governor's name is Zerubbabel. And in our reading, Zechariah says, I've got a message for you, Zerubbabel. You laid the foundation stone for the temple to be rebuilt. Now you're feeling discouraged because of all the things that are going wrong. It feels like a mountain you can't climb. But you laid the foundation and you will be there on the topping out ceremony. You will also lay the top stone. You did the first symbolic start for the temple, and you'll do the final symbolic completion of it. You will. You'll see it done. And so this era of rebuilding, the temple is the central feature. The governor has symbolically laid the foundation stone. The problems are mounting up. And the prophet Zechariah says, don't worry, because it actually doesn't depend upon you. It doesn't depend upon your strength, and it doesn't depend upon the superpower strength of the empire. It doesn't depend upon you being governor. It doesn't depend upon those of us who are helping rebuild it, because God has decided this temple is going to be built, and God is saying to you, you need to work, obviously. I'm not telling you just to down tools and watch, but it's not really by your power, it's not really by your might, it's by my spirit that this impossible thing will be achieved. Well, 500 years later, Jesus got his disciples together to ask them about word on the street. What are people saying about me? And they gave various reports about what people were saying about Jesus. Then Jesus turned the question to them and said, and you guys, what do you think? Simon Peter as he was about to become, means the rock, but Simon as he still was then says, you are the Christ, or Messiah. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus reacts jubilantly to this. He says, well, blessed are you, Simon, Jonah's son, because this hasn't been revealed to you by clever human thinking. This doesn't make you smarter than everybody else. This is an insight that has been given to you by God, my Father. The Father's shown you this. This is not a normal conclusion, but an insight. And the insights that come from God come through the work of the Spirit, if they're truly of God insights. They come through the work of God's Spirit. And Jesus went on to say, Simon, you're the foundation. You've seen what needs to be seen and you trust it. So your insight given to you by God, by revelation, by God's Spirit, and your faith, which Paul will explain much later in the life of the church, is another working of God's Spirit, means that on what you are, I can build my church. And the very gates of hell, it's the picture of a fortified city with gates that an enemy comes to attack. Picture the church attacking hell. The very gates of hell will not withstand my church. And so what we understand, I think Jesus may very intentionally be thinking back to Zechariah chapter 4. I'm not certain of that, but I think it's very likely. However, the point is the same. Jesus laid the foundation and on Peter the rock, the first disciple, to say, I recognize who you are and I'm responding. I'm following you because I know who you are. You're the Son of the living God. You're the Christ, the one promised. And Jesus says, on this I lay my foundation stone. And know this, folks, that it is Christ who will lay the top stone. You see, the church is not an institution. We keep thinking of it as if it were. And that misleads us. And it can sometimes throw us off our own purpose. Instead of looking forward to the next phase of building, sometimes we look back to an imagined golden era when the church seemed more complete than it is today. And the answer is it wasn't complete because you hadn't been born yet. Or it wasn't complete because the youngest of us hadn't yet been born. It wasn't complete because it's never complete until the final generation of humanity on planet Earth. Whenever that might be, however that might be, that's another question. But only then is it complete. It's not a construction that can be made and then sit there in time like a cathedral or a castle or something. It is a living temple created in living lives of human beings, and our being church on the earth. We're the living temple. And therefore it is constantly under construction. It's never been finished, never will be. There isn't a past to look back to. There's a future to build and move forward into. It doesn't mean that we can't learn from what has gone in the past. It doesn't mean that we don't build upon what has been built in the past. It's just that, well, it couldn't have been complete at any point in the past because we weren't building it. And it's a living temple. It's happening through time with every generation. There's an image which pops up in Zechariah chapter 4 in this fifth of his visions that I just want to say something about, because the book of Revelation actually borrows this image. There's a great kind of symbiotic relationship between reading Zechariah and reading the book of Revelation, which quarried quite a lot of its material from Zechariah. So here's the image, and we need to just, it's not horrendously hard, honestly, and it just helps us fix in our heads with a picture the message that it's not by our ingenuity, not by our strength, not by our dedication, not by our goodness, not by anything we are or anything we do that the church is made secure into the next generation and beyond. It is by God's Spirit. As long as God's Spirit is revealing Christ to anyone, as long as God's Spirit is calling people to follow Christ and drawing them into that following, the church will go on being built and being built and being built until in the last generation it is at last complete. And the picture that we can use from Zechariah is this one. Imagine a lampstand. Remember, we're talking 500 years before Jesus, so 2,500 years ago. All the light, anywhere you went, ran in that part of the world on this stuff, olive oil. Okay. So the standard symbolic light that represents God's light at the time was the 7-branched menorah lamp. But Zechariah sees a new kind of light shining out in the place of the temple. He sees a different lampstand in his vision. Instead of having 7 branches, it is divided right at the top into 7 lights, and each of those 7 lights is divided into 7 other lights. So you have 49 lights. And the message is, so 7, as I'm sure you know, is the number of completeness in the Bible. It always represents completeness, perfection, something finished, something good and complete in itself. So you've gone completeness times perfection, or perfection times perfection, if you like, is the maths of what's going on at the top. In other words, the light has always shone, but now it's going to shine with a perfection it's never had before. We are starting something that shines out the light of God into the world beyond anything that's gone before it. And that's the picture. And behind or beside this lampstand shining with this new light that is in fact a continuation of an old light, but now has a new vigour and is a new light as well, far brighter. This new light is plugged into the olive trees. Now, normally, the lights would run off this stuff, the olive oil, and that would happen by people harvesting the olive oil and harvesting the olives, crushing the olives, sorting it out, then pressing it until the oil runs out the bottom, collect the oil, burn a light. But to make the point that God is not dependent upon you and me in the future of his light shining out into all the world. This light plugs straight into the source of energy itself. No human being's work is involved between the olive tree, the source of the energy, and the energy that shines out through Christ. Now, you probably also know that pretty much throughout the Bible, the olive oil symbolizes God's Spirit. And so what's being said is from the very source of God's Spirit, the flow goes directly into the new light, and that new light will shine out into all the earth from here. And that's exactly what we see happening in the light of the world, who is Christ. And we are those who in our generation are to build the church, and then the next generation to build the church, and the next generation to build the church. And it won't be a reproduction of what we did 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or 10 years ago. It'll constantly change as each generation moves with the Spirit of God. As long as the Spirit is revealing Christ, as long as the Spirit is moving us to faithfulness, the church will go on being built. And we get to be part of that astonishing, amazing process. It means we can go into the future untroubled about things which may be very precious to us. For those of us who are Christians, the church is the community of Jesus. It's a community Jesus started and which we continue. It's unbelievably precious. It's constantly subject to persecutions, discouragements, mountainous problems. Zechariah's message and Jesus' message is simple. It doesn't depend upon you. You don't have to reproduce some golden era of the past. You don't even have to worry about the future. You just need to be faithful and be part of it. God bless you. Amen.